Okay, yeah, so I think I can get started already. Right, so hi everyone. First of all, my name is Desmond. I am from Khyber. And today I'll be talking about decentralized liquidity for dApps. What exactly are the opportunities and challenges that decentralized applications face today regarding liquidity? Okay, so first of all, once again, it's going to be a very interactive discussion. But before that, let me set some context about how Kyber facilitates liquidity. Now, first of all, how many of you have heard of Kyber network? All right, okay, that's not too bad, about half the audience. For the rest of you who don't know, let me give a brief introduction of what we do. So we are an on-chain liquidity protocol that allows anyone to easily access or contribute liquidity in a decentralized manner, right? So the protocol has kind of two properties. Number one, it is decentralized, therefore it is not owned by anybody. And second of all, it is permissionless, right? Where anyone can access liquidity, and we are working hard towards making contributions permissionless as well. Now, the key mechanism of what our protocol is fully on-chain decentralized token swaps, right? So a few properties here. Number one, once again, fully on-chain. You do not have to interact with any off-chain components, right? So for your smart contracts, you can just talk to our smart contract to execute the trade. Second of all, it is instant, whereby the trade execution happens in a single blockchain transaction. And finally, there is low transactional cost, so there is no need for users to deposit or withdraw funds or tokens. And there is no additional latency besides waiting for the transaction to be mined. All right, so how exactly does Kyber facilitate liquidity? I think it's best for me to give a couple of examples. So let's take a look at them. Number one, it is swap functionality. So users can perform these very basic token-to-token swaps. For example, from KNC to DAI, right? And they can do this in popular wallets like Iron Token, Monitor Wallet, and also on websites like Kyber Swap, EA Swap, right? Second of all, it is payments, right? Where anyone can pay in the token of their choice, and yet the vendor or merchant is able to receive in his token of his choice. For example, in a DAI stablecoin, right? Because he wants stability. Third of all, it is maybe like a non-fungible token acquisition, whereby, for example, CryptoKitties, they are able to accept in payment in any ERC20 token, and then they transfer the non-fungible token directly to the user. Fourth of all, it is arbitrage bots, where you can interact with other services like Bancor and to be able to kind of profit from these discrepancies in prices. And last of all, it is fund rebalancing, whereby index funds are able to perform multiple token swaps in order to reach their optimized portfolio allocation. Okay. So now let's take a look at this very simple case, right? All we want to do is to swap from KNC to DAI, right? But what I want you to observe here, right, as I run through a few examples, I want you to take note of these, the kind of liquidity flows that are happening, right? So over here, right, it's supposed to be red arrows, but the screen colors, right? So you see, it is KNC, right? A user wants to swap KNC. What he does is he transfers his token to the Kyber contract, and then it is swapped for Ether because we use Ether as a base pair, right? And afterwards, it involves like a liquidity provider here. In this case, we term them as a reserve. Right, and the thing is that maybe the reserve only supports the KNC to Ether pair, just one token pair, and he doesn't support the Ether to DAI pair. Therefore, there is the need to interact with another reserve, for example, right? And so the Ether is then swapped for DAI, and in this case, it could be the user or the merchant, as you can see in the next slide. Right, so over here is the same kind of flows that you're seeing, but there is this additional step where once the vendor receives his payment, he can transfer the non-fungible token, in this case, to the user. The thing here is that it can be done in a single step, right? Because we run fully on-chain. Now, this last example that I want to highlight is for a user who contributes to an index fund, right? So he contributes in KNC token once again, and it's swapped for Ether. But notice here, in this like smart contract function, right? He's able to convert the Ethers to like, for example, 3 different tokens. And the thing is that maybe it has to involve multiple exchanges, right? So then it's split up into the different allocations. For example, maybe it's 40% in 0x, another 40% in basic attention token, and the last 20% in Zilliqa tokens. So once again, all these like multiple token swaps, right, can happen in a single transaction. But over here, you notice the key point I want to drive here is that there are multiple value exchanges happening between multiple parties, right? So like over here is the user, the index fund, and all these reserves. Yep. So multiple value exchanges between multiple parties. Yep. At Khyber, right, what we really hope to do is to facilitate this. You can see how we have kind of like facilitate liquidity flows. And over here, I like to open up this discussion. Really, number one is to get kind of like get the audience like how exactly what decentralized liquidity means to you. What are the opportunities and challenges that you face with liquidity, right? So maybe you can jump to the first question. Yep. I'll use this like a, wow. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so first of all, the first question, what is decentralized? What does decentralized liquidity mean to you or your debt? Anyone wants to take a shot? Anybody?
So maybe like for the projects that are here, like from Summit Protocol, etc. Like especially for those projects, right, that are part of DeFi, maybe you have your own liquidity challenges. So maybe you can share to the audience like what liquidity means for you, and yeah, maybe you can generally share like how it is for you, or like for the different DApp projects that are here. If anyone would like to share. Yeah.
I work for Summit Protocol.
Maybe you could give a brief introduction, like how set protocol works for those who don't, understand how it works. Maybe a 1-2-liner.
We're basically the protocol allows you to bundle assets together. So specifically right now, here's your 20 tokens. One like the use case we have is rebalancing tokens. So a way to automatically rebalance from one allocation to another. One of the kind of problems we have is we have very specific amounts that need to be included in that in those tokens in order to maintain the collateralization of the token itself, because these are all fully collateralized. So one of the biggest liquidity problems we have is if you do a rebalance from one token to another, are you getting it in the correct quantities, and are you guaranteed those quantities? And then B, what is the amount of slippage because of that? And by slippage, I mean like the execution costs of going from ZA to ZB. You will usually incur some sort of, you might lose 1% of value on that due to the spread of the market and stuff like that. So,
yeah. I would assume you also have a problem if there's not a direct pair you need to go through Ether or something.
Yeah, I mean, that might be even a bigger problem. I mean, that's all rolled up into how do you get the liquidity on those pairs. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way we decided to solve this through an auction process, essentially going from one set to another. Obviously, we would love if there was just a massive source of liquidity we could tap into for the amount we need with like a certain, slippage amount that we could expect. That'd be great.
Okay. So to understand what you're saying is that you would like to see kind of like well, I suppose you could have multiple pools, but then maybe you just need to interact with one kind of you kind of want certainty, right, in the amounts that you're getting and the rates, right? So I think amounts would really depend on the liquidity depth, how much is available, of course. And for rates, it really depends. Okay, I'm speaking on behalf of Khyber, right? So for rates, right, we have reserve managers who kind of periodically feed rates on chain. And the thing is, it is up to them to decide how frequent they want to update their rates. Therefore, in terms of certain rate certainty, it is really dependent on what is the best rate the current best rate that is which reserve is offering the best rate, first of all, and second, how often does he update this rate. So let's say maybe I'm offering, let me give an example, right? Let's say we want to swap from ETH to KNC, right? So I offer the rate of 1 ETH to 5 KNC, right? And my rate is the best, and therefore I am kind of selected as the reserve to perform this trade. Now, what if I only update the rate every, say, 5 minutes, right? Then in that sense, you kind of have this like rate guarantee of me offering the best rate for this like 5 minutes. Or I suppose in block times, it would be maybe like, what's 5 minutes? 20 blocks, right? So it kind of like, for us, right, you only have like certainty in this like 20 blocks. Yeah, and therefore, like in terms for us, we can't really like guarantee this rate, but we have this like a slippage rate, of course. Is there anything?
Yeah, I don't have the expectation of like rate guarantees per se, but just like how fast is it going to get away from you? You know, especially if you're rebalancing a good amount of tokens, like there's a chance that the price just kind of gets away from you, and that could happen. It's not specific just to Kyber, right? Yeah. You know, typically, especially when you're dealing with more, I mean, this is essentially a derivative. A lot of that stuff is usually dealt over the counter. Sorry, people aren't familiar. It's like person to person usually in you know, traditional financial markets a lot of the time. Just because, you know, if you're blocking a huge trade, people want to be able to take like the commensurate amount of risk to do that. And so that's really hard to do in just like an algorithmic environment, I suppose, is be able to take that risk and then offlay it in such a way that you can guarantee you're making money as like the liquidity provider.
Right. Yeah. Sure. I mean, just to add as well, like for Khyber, right? So we say decentralized liquidity, right? So like emphasizing on decentralized, which means that the liquidity is on chain, right? And one of the things that we realize that is important is that there is this value as well that are in other chains, like let's say Bitcoin, right? So I'm not sure, has anyone heard about the recent announcement about WBTC, where we're actually trying to bring, you know, liquidity from Bitcoin to the Ethereum chain? Yeah, so this is actually something that's important to us at Khyber, is because we're trying to really, you know, push this decentralized liquidity flows, right? That's everything on chain. So we're trying to like as Khyber, right, we're trying to help facilitate this in one seamless, in a seamless manner where everything can be done in a single transaction, basically. So in that sense, right, because this is important for Khyber, like, and we hope that this is important for the other DeFi projects as well. So, like what other, maybe another question would be like, what other important aspects of decentralized liquidity are there for these other projects or dApps? So for us, like as I shared, right, we're trying to bring liquidity from other chains to Ethereum because we want to bring that value over to Ethereum. So, yeah, maybe anyone could share about that. Yeah, sure.
Hello. Hi, it's Alex from Quinterum. We are building a hybrid OTC platform with centralized and decentralized liquidity. One of the questions that we face quite a bit is the scalability of the Ethereum platform. So if the cap is, whatever, 7 transactions per second, then if you want to build a global scalable platform, how are you able to cope with basically a buffer that keeps getting bigger on the transactions that are held up and that eventually explodes? How do you deal with scalability on the Ethereum network?
Yeah, so first of all, I mentioned that we are fully on-chain, and therefore we are really dependent on the state of the network, right? So you can imagine if we were to have more and more reserves on board, and they want to frequently update their price, then it's gonna cause network congestion. So yes, scalability is an issue. We are working hard on our own kind of scalability approaches, and we have kind of our own research going on. We call it GORMOS. So it is it's still under heavy research currently, but I think we will have more details that we can release by the end of this year. Yeah, so I agree that scalability is an issue. And how do we really address it? Of course, number one is looking at our own solutions. Number two, it is looking at what other solutions that are being researched currently. So things like plasma sharding, these are very important concepts, but they have their own challenges as well, right? Therefore, it is not just us, of course. We want to work with the community to look for a practical, scalable solution that can kind of help to scale this network. Yeah.
So I'm Clay from 0x. We're a decentralized exchange protocol as well. One thing that we think a lot about with respect to liquidity is kind of the two sides of the equation associated with that. So that's the maker and taker side of each order. So how can we bring more market makers into the ecosystem, as well as how can we bring more end users to drive that taker volume? Because it is sort of a chicken and the egg problem where liquidity begets liquidity, but you need one side of that equation to kind of kickstart that flywheel effect. And so how do you guys think about that? And how should other projects within the space be thinking about it as well?
Right. So for us, initially we had to bootstrap our network. Right. We from the funds that we raised in our ICO, I'll say about half of it. Right. Half of it went to reserves. So we had to set up our own reserve, our own like market maker in that sense. Of course, we did approach like other kind of like.
Other reserves.
Other reserves to kind of help to provide liquidity for their own tokens. So project teams as well, they do approach us, and like if they want to list their own tokens, right? They also have to kind of provide the initial liquidity for that.
Yes.
Yep.
So not just that, right? So for example, you can have this large token funds that have idle assets, and they just want to contribute liquidity for this assets that they have, right? So that's like one avenue. And we do approach this, big funds that have this large amount of assets that they can provide liquidity for. So again, maybe going back also to your question is that how exactly does 0x also solve this problem? Like, what are your approaches? Maybe you can share some to the group. Yeah.
We'll share a couple in a few minutes in our presentation, but I think the three parts of the equation are traders, market makers, and relayers, because more relayers create more markets bring more traders on board, and more traders and takers incentivize more liquidity to come on board. And so we have solutions to address each of those parts of the ecosystem. So how can we simplify the end user experience to allow for easier interaction with decentralized exchange, as well as with market makers specifically, that's kind of been a difficult nut to crack, in that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, because one, there's the infrastructure that needs to be built for them to interact with decentralized exchange, but you also have to have that financial incentive there. And we're of the opinion that having spreads that are 10x what you see on centralized exchanges should be enough, but I think that it's also having the table stakes infrastructure that allows them to interact with decentralized exchange before they can really begin to interact with it. So yeah, short summary, but a lot happening under the hood.
The risk involved with market making in terms of, obviously there's going to be a higher spread just because you have an uncertain state of your position and stuff like that. I guess for people you talk to, how do they think about it?
Well, for example, for the reserves, right, because we have multiple reserves, so each reserve has their own approach on how they set rates, for example, or how they deal with the spread, right? So for example, one reserve can aggregate different rates from different centralized exchanges or decentralized exchanges and feed that into the smart contract, or they can have their own like pricing or rate model, right, that they run off chain and then just feed this data back into the smart contract. So in terms of like the protocol itself, right, because we do have our own reserve for Kyber, so we have our own method of doing feeding these rates. But in that sense, like, because the protocol has the algorithm that just gives the best rate for the user, right? So it really depends on the strategy, I guess, of each reserve, right? So.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think to add on, right, reserves are incentivized to market make. They do, like, I'm not sure what risks they take into account and how they kind of account it for their spread. Internally, we have like a guy, we have a person who kind of does that. So it would be best if, he's the one with like the expertise on this topic. But for reserves, right, what they do is really to kind of like, I suppose they really have to kind of look at, take all these risks into account already, and then factor it into the spread. Yeah.
They tend to play off liquidity on centralized exchanges. Like if they take a position, right, they want to get out of some at risk, so they want to get out of it as fast as they can. Do they usually use centralized exchanges to do that, or is that?
Okay. Yeah. Do you know?
Do you have a question, or do you want to?
Yeah, I guess I can talk from my own point of view as well.
So yeah, I'm Jacob from ZeroX as well. I think for like our market makers, the biggest risk is like if the market moves faster than the block time and people want to get out of that position, and that's like the #1 problem that market makers kind of want to de-riskify. So for us, it's like if a market maker has like 10 positions in 10 different tokens, they want to just get out. We kind of saw this when Tether was going down very quickly. We saw all the market making bots just start canceling orders. So like we kind of really focus on just making that more and more efficient as possible. So one thing we kind of did in our latest V2 release was allow someone to cancel any arbitrary number of orders. So a market maker can basically exit the position as like quick as possible, as efficiently as possible, and then kind of just wait for that market to kind of recover. So that's how we're focusing on it right now, just efficiency, and that's all we can kind of really do at this point. You got it.
Put in a position where they're waiting for a transaction to be live.
Yeah.
But it could be stuck there for a minute or two while the market's getting wet.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to go through.
So I guess the only thing they can really do is efficiently exit and then just jack up the gas price and hope it gets mined.
And the other thing I'd add too is, how does this play out in the market over the next 6 to 12 months? I think that we may see a similar progression to what we saw with centralized exchanges a few years back, where smaller funds with lower AUMs that have a higher risk tolerance will come into the market first and start to take advantage of those large spreads. And then as the market becomes more and more efficient, you'll see larger entrants into the space. Once that liquidity is there, and then also once the infrastructure is there that makes it easy to plug, as easy to plug into a decentralized exchange as it is to plug into a centralized exchange.
Hi, I'm Jason. I'm at CoinFund. I'm an engineer and a node operator for various proof of stake networks. I wanted to further ask questions about how you think about incentive models for people operating nodes to provide liquidity on your network. I know it's been discussed, but outside of fees that you would bake into to your node, you discussing any inflation reward structures to incentivize people to run nodes to provide liquidity?
Right. So maybe I can add to this. So for now, right, we haven't really had a discussion on having different incentive models for onboarding new reserves, right? But what could be an incentive, right, for adding liquidity into our protocol, right, is that, let's say you have this token teams, right, and they maybe did their own ICO or they have their own token, right? And this token is actually not available in any exchange. And how they want to bootstrap liquidity for their own token is that they can just plug in it as a reserve. And later down the year, this contribution of liquidity, right, to be a reserve will be completely permissionless. So anyone who basically has, some token, let's say token A, token X, whatever, can just, plug that into the protocol, and this instantly becomes usable into any part of the ecosystem that's tapping to that protocol. So that's one incentive for this token teams.
Right. So to rephrase what my colleague said, it is perhaps maybe the exclusivity, the token is exclusive, on Khyber, for example, right? So in that sense, they are the monopoly, and of course Oh, then again, there is P2P, for example, like Ether Delta, right? But no, the initial kind of liquidity that they provide, then they can probably set a higher spread. Yeah.
So right now, right, the only incentive for them is just to earn from the spread, right? But how each reserve approaches this problem of, dealing with their own spread is up to them. So that's their full flexibility. Yeah, like I mentioned, like they have their own pricing models, or they aggregate data, etc. Yeah. Anyone have any follow-up questions or discussions? And yeah, sure.
Slightly different question, if that's okay. I just want to mention privacy. Maybe have a chat about that, because a lot of the clients potentially, especially the big fund clients with larger UMs, they might not necessarily want to reveal the trades they're doing. So have you thought of any solutions that kind of covers privacy, such as zero knowledge proofs or dark pools or anything like that?
So for dark pools, right, there's this project or other company called Republic Protocol. Have you heard of it? Yeah. So we do work closely with them, but for us in Khyber, we're not like making our own dark pool implementation, for example. But because, like, for example, for Republic, they do integrate with Kyber, like, for example, for tapping additional liquidity. In that sense, if you do use their protocol and they do need liquidity, like, let's say for certain tokens, then in essence, they're also tapping into our own protocol for liquidity. Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, like, in terms of, like, for privacy issues, right? Yeah, you want to add?
Apart from that, I'm not sure. I think we could have further discussions about privacy, for sure.
Yeah.
Internally, and then after that, with the community.
Yeah, sure. Anyone want to have additional questions or something to say? So maybe I can add one more question to the group. What does everyone hope to see in decentralized liquidity moving forward, right? So right now we're a very nascent space, and there's definitely a lot of problems that we're facing right now, like with 0x, et cetera. So maybe I want to hear everyone's different perspectives on what they hope that we can solve together moving forward. So maybe some of you guys can share.
I think the user experience, which is similar to a centralized exchange, where if you want to trade in the dark pool, you can raise it. If you want to you've got decent liquidity across a whole number of pairs without having to go to multiple different exchanges. And also without you guys having to take reserve risk on a collateral that you've got, if the market moves against you, then it's clearly not great for you.
Right, definitely.
But I guess that would be
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think there's all these fractional liquidity pools on Ethereum right now, so it would be really good if 0x and Khyber and some Bancor and Ether Delta can kind of work together and actually try and share these liquidity pools instead of having these silos. So any initiative to basically achieve that would greatly help the overall ecosystem.
And I think that's something we're trying to achieve in DeFi, right? Together, we all work together to interact and interoperate. Yeah, sure.
What kind of scope of liquidity you're trying to offer in terms of different tokens? I think it's hard for me to think about the problem. If I look at Kyber as a general liquidity provider, it's as a node operator, it's hard to model the economics for an unbounded number of tokens, right? And I guess that's something.
I didn't catch your question, sorry. Yeah. No, repeat the question.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, sure. I guess I'm looking at Kyber as a network that provides liquidity, right? Or a platform that allows people to come in with liquidity and use your smart contract framework. How as a person that operates a node, I'm trying to think about how you would model the economics, right? And what kind of scope of liquidity that you're trying to provide, right? If I were able to acquire a bunch of different tokens to fill out this guy's index token, right? how do I think about which tokens I'm trying to get so that it can provide liquidity on your network, or which combinations of tokens? Like, how would I economically like analyze that?
How would you like economically incentivize?
No, okay. So, if I'm trying to like make fees by participating in your network, right? How do I think about which tokens to try to provide liquidity for, right? And narrow the scope from like any token that exists to like potentially tokens that I might purchase and stake.
So in terms of this, right, it could be really specific or domain knowledge, right? For example, in your case, or maybe for other reserves, right, they're more familiar with the markets, let's say with 0x, with BAT, with Zilliqa, etc. So this is what they're initially providing liquidity for, because they know the markets, right? And they know how to, the strategy of setting rates, basically, right? Or it really depends, right? There are these reserves, right, that are just basically token funds, and they just have, or they're holding tokens because they're a fund, right? So that's why they're offering liquidity for these different tokens. So I guess in terms of like you, right, if you want to be a reserve and you want to offer liquidity, it really depends on maybe your specific domain knowledge on these different tokens and how you think you can earn from the spread from these different tokens as well, because as a reserve. Yeah. But aside from that, because right, there's the only incentive model, right, of being a reserve is that you're earning from the spread, right?
Right. How are you then thinking about like which how to create the market for like demand for those reserves from your users?
Right. So I think you can split it broadly into two categories. Number one, it is tokens that are really popular. So for example, like really liquid and illiquid markets, right? So for liquid markets, because it's more popular, but the rates are more transparent, meaning people can compare what you're offering with other reserves. So there, in terms of the profit making, maybe it's not so much, but for more towards like the illiquid tokens, then you kind of are able to set like a higher spread, because in terms of price discovery, it's rather difficult. Yeah. So I suppose you are perhaps like incentivized to provide liquidity for the tokens that doesn't have much debt.
Okay, thank you.
So what time is it? It's okay? Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions?
So yeah, anyone else like, moving forward, what they want to see in this space, like in terms of like decentralized liquidity, right? So anyone else like that wants to share on that? Moving forward, especially for the other dApp projects that are here.
Yeah.
So maybe for Khyber, yeah. Share about, okay.
Share about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, moving forward in the coming few months, number one, our focus would be on really working once again on the reserves, the contribution. I think for us, we have been working a lot on the accessing part, right? So therefore, we have been speaking to a lot of projects. But when it comes to more of the contribution, it will involve a lot more internal discussion and really to see, like you said, how do we like incentivize more reserves to come on board. Second of all, it's of course to work with the community on bringing Bitcoin into Ethereum. So it is kick-started by us, but we really want it to be a very community-oriented project. So it's not just about us, really it's about this, how exactly do we see what needs what are the needs of the space, and then how exactly can we work together to serve the community together. So I guess to summarize what Felix shared just now, right? It is really about how do we build an open financial system together. Yep. That's all I have. I think we can move on to the next session by 0x.